Thank you. Racial tensions in the US are shaping up to become a key issue in the 2020 presidential election, and Democratic candidate Joe Biden has vowed to address institutional racism in his first 100 days in office. Well, Biden was vice president under Barack Obama, and earlier he met with African-American community leaders in Delaware. Well, he's criticized Donald Trump's response to the crisis. The president has urged authorities to crack down on protesters. Well, let's head to the American capital now for more on the political battle lines being drawn over this crisis. Washington Post reporter Rhonda Colvin joins me now. Good afternoon to you, May. Thanks for joining us on the programme. So as we're saying, two very different stances taking there, aren't there? One from Joe Biden, the other from the US president, far more belligerent, calling governors weak and demanding tougher crackdowns.
That's right. Very different responses here last week, or a few days ago, actually. We saw former Vice President Biden come out, be very supportive of protesters who needed to raise awareness of the inequities that Black people face when dealing with the police. And then you've had just a series of tweets from President Trump where he has been criticized for sort of agitating the issue. You just mentioned there his most latest tweet is telling governors that they need to dominate the situation, dominate the protesters. And of course, that's a very different language from his presumed competitor, Joe Biden, is using.
Yeah, and it's clearly a very tense and febrile atmosphere. Now, we were just hearing about these demonstrations taking place around the world. But if we look to the US, is there any sign that these demonstrations are going to calm down?
You know, I think governors and mayors across the country right now are bracing themselves for another night of potential protest. I know here in D.C., the mayor here has said that there's a curfew here until that starts at 7 p.m. That's about 3 hours earlier than the curfew she set last night. So a lot of mayors are taking this very seriously. Even though it's been 6 days, they're not thinking that it's going to let up anytime soon, and they're preparing for the chance of more protests tonight.
So, yes, we're saying very difficult atmosphere in the States. And this comes on top of, obviously, the coronavirus crisis now. And one can only think that it takes strong leadership to calm crises like these now, particularly this one that's been sparked by George Floyd's killing. Is there any sense that there is this sort of leadership from the US president beginning to kick in to kind of control these protests and bring calm?
You know, this remains to be seen. Just that tweet a few hours ago saying that governors need to not be so weak, that was from the president. That's not language of any comfort to too many people. So we have yet to see the president really address this. There have been calls by members of his own party and some of his aides in the White House who are saying, you know, please come out, make a statement of some sort. But he also has other aides who are telling him to be very cautious and potentially stand down for right now because he's in an election year and he's got to be very careful about what he says. So we are hearing reports that that's happening inside the White House right now, trying to figure out his next steps and his messaging. But so far, it's been a week since George Floyd died and a few days of protests all across the country in small and large cities alike. And we have not heard a specific message from the president.
Yeah, we haven't had a specific message from the president, but you say he has been active on Twitter and he has called out a group that he calls the Antifa group. Now, tell us, what do we know about this? Because at least over here, it's not so well known. And what's the basis for him condemning this group for the violence in these protests?
Well, that's very politically based because Antifa, back during the 2016 election and after his inauguration, it was seen as a group that was far left. So he's being very political when he mentions that it's them and injecting politics into this. We also know that there are people joining these protests who are part of an organization that wants to bring about anarchy, and they have symbols that they've been spray painting across buildings and different places across the country. So there is an element of these protests that have nothing to do with George Floyd, that are just people going around the country or going to cities that they were not even residents of, trying to wreak havoc.
OK, well, Rhonda Colvin there from the Washington Post. Many thanks.